Okay, everyone, thank you again for being here. I will continue my lecture on the 1920s, which is, 100 years ago. 100 years ago was 1921. And an interesting time and a complicated time, and certainly not a time without its problems and controversy. A few things I want to say. You need to understand that in the years following World War One, the United States entered a period of what we call isolationism in terms of global politics. In the end, even though participation in the League of Nations and the League of Nations itself was something that was proposed by an American president, Woodrow Wilson, the United States never joined it. So I don't know that the League of Nations would have ever worked anyway, but it went into effect without American participation, which more or less guaranteed that it was going to be doomed from the start, and it was. The League of Nations did not prevent World War II, nor did it successfully resolve any of the conflicts of the 1920s or 30s. The 1920s is an interesting period, and a lot of it looks like fun. You have speakeasies, and you have, which are nightclubs, many of them. Not all speakeasies were the same. Some were basically just places where people went to drink. Others were more like a nightclub. Because of prohibition, of course, any alcohol consumption was illegal. And I've often thought that one of the greatest ways to motivate somebody to do something is to tell them they can't do it. And that certainly was the case. Prohibition didn't stop people from drinking, and it didn't stop them from going out. It helped to make organized crime wealthier because now they're making a fortune selling bootleg alcohol, just like drug dealers make money selling drugs. People back then made money selling alcohol. And I'm not saying this, by the way, to advocate for drug legalization. I'm not personally in favor of legalizing everything. I think that I would like to see society have some limits, but you're making alcohol, making beer and wine illegal didn't really make much sense, and it didn't work, and it was unenforceable, and it diverted law enforcement resources to running around trying to destroy barrels of beer and things of that nature. But people had a good time. As I said earlier, jazz music was the soundtrack of the 20s. And for those of you who joined the Zoom meeting earlier, I was playing some jazz music in the background. I like it. And jazz music, as I said in my earlier lecture, was the music of the young. It was the music of rebellion. It was the music of, high energy. And, just like parents today may complain about the music that their children listen to, certainly jazz music at the time is something that, while the younger generation may have enjoyed it, the older generation wasn't thrilled about it. And we see that repeat itself again in the 1950s with the development of rock and roll music. So the 1920s looks like a fun time in some ways. And hold on a moment here. So I want to just review. Women got the right to vote and voted in the 1920 election. Warren G. Harding was elected president. He ran on a campaign where he promised a, quote, return to normalcy. We can look at American history and evaluate how many people have been fit or unfit for political office. And if you want to talk about people unfit for political office, Warren G. Harding, I think, belongs on that list. He was elected president because people wanted to change, and he sounded good and he looked good. There's a lot of talk these days about men in power using their position as an opportunity to engage in sexual harassment or misconduct. Uh, let's just say that the Me Too movement would have a lot of work to do in dealing with Warren G. Harding. He was a married man. That didn't stop him from chasing after women, including married women, younger women. Um, and you want to talk about scandal. He was accused of fathering an illegitimate child with a much younger woman. And we now know through DNA evidence, because the descendants live on, that it's true. And even when he was running for president, he was fooling around. And so when you want to talk about political leaders engaging in highly questionable personal behavior, Harding gets right on that list. Of course, it's legendary. Of course, the stories of John Kennedy chasing after women. And then, of course, there's the famous scandal involving Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And now the governor of New York has been accused of sexual harassment. But I think that Warren G. Harding deserves to be remembered, because he's up there. When you look at his behavior, you just scratch your head and think to yourself, like, what is this guy thinking? I mean, come on. And I don't want to divert too much time, but he would write these love letters. In those days, you didn't have email and you didn't have text. So he would write these love letters, to some of the women that he was involved with. And some of those letters have survived. And I'm not gonna read them to you in the Zoom meeting, but he is not shy about describing what he's thinking and what he would like to do. And I'll leave it at that. And here's a grown man, married man, seeking higher office, and it's like reading the notes that a high school sophomore would send to their girlfriend or something. It's just like, really, you wrote that? And if you want to entertain yourself on your own time, you can just go on the internet and look up Warren G. Harding love letters, and you will be amused. And he becomes president, and he is totally not the man for the job. And his administration was filled with people who wanted to use their position to simply profit. It might be the most corrupt administration since the scandals of Ulysses Grant. And you have, for example, he has an attorney general who's corrupt, and of course you have prohibition. But if you have enough money, maybe the government gives you a waiver. And then there were a lot of people who were trying to sell alcohol illegally, but they claimed it was produced for medicinal purposes. And there was just all sorts of funny business going on. And then, of course, there's this famous scandal called the Teapot Dome scandal, where bribes were given to government officials in exchange for the granting of government leases to drill for oil. I think it was an area called, I think it was Teapot Dome, Wyoming, I think is where the land was. So, you have people in his administration who were just taking kickbacks and offering favors, and people selling influence. And I think it was Harding who may have made the comment, my enemies don't concern me so much. Keep me away from the people who say they're my friends. But in fairness, he is the boss, and not knowing that the people you've picked to be in your administration are corrupt, well, it reflects on you. Even when Grant was president, I don't dislike Ulysses Grant. I think he was a decent man, in many ways a heroic one. Certainly, he's on the $50 bill for a reason. But you look at these people in his administration who were basically, robbing the country blind. And he put them there, and with Harding, it's the same. Harding did not have to suffer the consequences of all his scandal because on a trip to San Francisco while staying at the Palace Hotel, he suffered a massive heart attack and died unexpectedly before the full nature of these scandals were revealed publicly. My wife has family in San Francisco, and prior to the pandemic, we would go up there 2 or 3 times a year because my wife has a grandmother up there who's elderly, and very often we would stay at the Palace Hotel, which we like because it's an old school hotel. It's got that old school feel to it. And as a joke, when we check in, I always ask for the Warren G. Harding room, but I don't get it. So that's irrelevant to the class. Just sharing a tidbit with you. So after Harding dies, his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, comes in. They called him Silent Cal because he was not a man accustomed to enjoying publicity or attention or making speeches. One of the interesting statements about Calvin Coolidge is a famous statement that he made, which I think really summarizes the 1920s in some ways. He says, quote, "The business of America is business. The business of America is business." And that conducting business, developing industry, entrepreneurship, making money is what, is the driving force behind America's success and prosperity. So that all sounds great, except for the fact that during that period, as people were making money and the stock market was going up, there was little or no government oversight over anything. And as I said earlier, people are just sort of going crazy with the use of credit, and they're using credit to buy stock. Well, what do you do if you borrow $10,000 to play the stock market and then the stock market crashes? I mean, the debt still exists. But then if you can't pay it, the bank or creditor who loaned you that money, they're not going to get paid back. So they're going to fail. And then it creates a chain reaction that will help to take down the economy. I mean, think about the housing market that crashed. What year was that? 2008, 2000, in the early 2000s. I mean, banks, if you had a pulse, banks would give you a loan to buy a house. And housing prices went way up, and then the market crashed. People were underwater on their mortgages. They walked away from the properties. The banks were stuck with these properties that were not worth as much as what was owed on them. And the federal government had to step in and act, or we could have very easily gone into another Great Depression. So I suppose one of the disturbing things about history is, I mean, we never really do learn our lesson, because every generation seems doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past because you didn't live through this period. What I will tell you when I think about the crash of the housing market is that the generation that lived through the Great Depression would not have made that mistake, because they would have known the risk of buying more than you can afford, banks making easy loans, overusing credit, abusing credit. That generation would have learned their lesson. So that's my view on that. The 1920s, as I said earlier, it's known as the Roaring 20s. It's also known as the Jazz Age. I mentioned in an earlier lecture that if you haven't read the book, The Great Gatsby, it is recommended. It is considered an American classic, and it is a book that accurately portrays sort of the excesses of that period. People like new technology. Before the pandemic, I would go shopping occasionally down at the mall. And one of the things that would amaze me is you would walk by the Apple store and you'd see a line of people waiting to get in. And I would say, well, what's this all about? And someone would say, well, they just released the new iPhone today. And I knew people who, they'd have an iPhone 10 that they would buy, and, there's nothing wrong with it. And then a year later, the iPhone 11 comes out, and next thing you know, they have to have the latest thing. Doesn't matter what it costs, they have to have it. Well, guess what? I'm still using an iPhone 7. And so long as it continues to do what I want it to do, I could care less about the newer camera or the face recognition or any of that stuff. It does what I need it to do. But there is an element within the population that always has to have the newest thing, the latest, greatest thing. And in the 20s, the number of consumer goods that are available is staggering. And the ability to advertise these new consumer goods is staggering. And when you add to that, the ability to use credit to get it. You don't have the money, it's okay. Well, buy it on credit. And in those days, they called it buying on margin. So in a way, the 1920s creates the perfect storm for people to get themselves into trouble. I mean, do you really want to be the only person on your street who doesn't have a car? Do you really want to be the only person on your street who doesn't have a modern refrigerator or a vacuum cleaner or a radio? So, all these new consumer goods, record players and radios and automobiles and washing machines, it's all there, and people want it. I mean, it really is the birth of the modern world. Hold on a moment here. One of the things I like about using the wait list feature is I make sure everybody's on mute when they come in, so there's no background noise. And I don't know, I must have been in a hurry or tired and I didn't set that up. So I think I'm good. I don't see anybody who is unmuted. But the reason I like having everybody on mute is that it avoids background noise. So the 1920s really is the birth of the modern world. I mean, if you were to go back in time, let's do a little field trip to 1927, for example. The technology is primitive by today's standards, but you'd recognize it. I mean, you'd recognize people driving in cars, and you'd recognize people using electric light, and you'd recognize people going out and listening to music and going to the movies. I mean, they're silent movies, but still. And, you'd recognize people just doing a lot of the things that we do today, although in a more primitive fashion. This is the beginning of that technology. I mean, just think about the idea of being able to buy food. And like, I go to the grocery store, I do a lot of the grocery shopping, and I come home, and anything that has to be refrigerated, like milk or eggs or cheese or produce or meat, I come home and it goes into the refrigerator. Well, that's a lot more convenient than having to worry about dealing with an ice box, where you literally had people deliver chunks of ice, and then you better make sure somebody's home, to check the drip tray every couple hours, or you're going to have a mess in the house. I mean, I don't know how many of you do chores at home, or how many of you did chores when you were younger. But imagine if one of your chores is, every 1 to 2 hours to dump out the water from the drip tray from the ice box. Imagine how long it took if you had to boil hot water every time you wanted hot water. I mean, can you imagine how nice it must have been? I mean, homes in the 1920s, I mean, they didn't yet have air conditioning, but I mean, the idea of having a furnace with heat and having hot and cold running water makes life a lot more comfortable, don't you think? I mean, would you like to live in a home that didn't have running water? Would you like to live in a home where you had to make a fire and boil water every time you wanted hot water? Would you like to live in a world where, you didn't have running showers like we have now? Now you're going to have, modern bathrooms with toilets that flush and hot water coming out of the sink, and refrigerators and all the rest. And people wanted this. And if they couldn't afford it, then they bought it on credit. So that was a big deal. Henry Ford developed the Model T, primitive by today's standards, but it beats walking. It beats riding a horse. Of course, I would have been in trouble back then, because, I mean, if I ever tried to ride a horse, the horse would probably just die. But, being able to drive a car, 35 miles an hour may not seem very fast to you, but it's a lot faster than the amount of distance you're going to cover on horseback or in a carriage pulled by a horse. So I want you to be aware, Henry Ford I don't personally like the man because of some of his racist views, but he was an innovator. He did not invent the automobile, but he invented a new way to to produce them. Let's see, I have a student says I have a class I have to go to. What should I study for the quiz? The quiz picks up where the last one left off. It'll cover everything up to World War One. So that's the deal on that. Let's see. So I want you to be aware of Henry Ford. He invented mass production with the assembly line. You could buy a Model T in any color you wanted, so long as it was black. And I want you to be aware of that. Another name for the Model T Ford, some people called it the Tin Lizzie, but it was the first car that ordinary people could afford. In the days before internet, print magazines and newspapers were much, much bigger. I don't even know if there aren't that many newspapers anymore that actually print a hard copy, and even if they do, why would you want it? When, I mean, you get your news on your electronic device and it's updated constantly. You buy yourself a morning newspaper, and by the afternoon, there may be new information. In those days, all the major cities of America had multiple newspapers. And I'm not making this up. They would print a morning edition, and they would print an afternoon edition, and they would print a late edition. So, you could buy, a morning newspaper on your way to work, or have a newspaper delivered to you. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when kids as a job could make some nice money delivering newspapers. It's not a job that I did, but that job still existed in my youth. And so if you were a kid who wanted to make some extra money, you might get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the papers would be delivered to you in large numbers, and you'd get on your bicycle or your scooter, and you go up the street, and you deliver the papers and put them into the box, or you just throw it into the driveway. And I remember, I mean, my aunt who passed away, I mean, every morning, she walked out into her driveway, and there was the newspaper. That the newspaper, it was a delivery boy or a girl had, and often, although some adults did it too, and would just deliver the paper. Just to give my age away, I am older than most of you. And what's funny is that as a child, I was born in 1969, and I was a child in the 70s. And I was alive as a child just at the tail end of certain things. You're not going to believe this, but as a child, my family, where we lived in New York State, we still had home milk deliveries. And just to show you how radically different the times are today, we had a milkman who came, I think, once or twice a week to the house, and we never locked the door. I know I sound like an old person now saying this, right? Pretty soon I'll tell you I walked 10 miles to school in the snow, which I didn't do. But we had a milkman who would come, door wasn't locked, no joke. He would show up like around 7 o'clock in the morning. He'd walk right into the house. He would just, a little knock on the door, and he'd let himself in because the door wasn't locked. This is no joke. He would walk in, and I remember this. That's how you know you're old, when you can say, I remember when. He would come into the house. He would walk into the kitchen. He would open our refrigerator, and he would look inside, and he would look at what was missing. So he never asked my mother what she wanted. We had an understanding. He would open the refrigerator, and if he didn't see any cheese, he would leave cheese. And if the milk was low, he would leave milk. And if we half and half, we would use for the coffee. And if we were out of it, he'd leave another one. And he would leave yogurt and eggs. So he delivered eggs, cheese, milk, half and half, yogurt, all dairy products, butter. And he would come into the house, he would open the refrigerator, he would see what was there and what wasn't, and he would stock us up on what we needed. And I remember in the morning I'd get ready for school and I'd run into him, like, oh, hello, Mr. So-and-so. And it would take maybe, I don't know, a minute or so, and then he would leave. And then at the end of the month, when he made his the last delivery of the month, he would leave a bill on the table. And then the next time he would come, my mother had the check for him and he would pick up the check. And that went on for much of my childhood. On one level, that probably sounds crazy to you, but on another level, doesn't that sound kind of cool that you could live in a world where that type of relationship with people could exist? Where you actually lived somewhere where locking your door was abnormal. We never had a locked door. My friends came over, they just knocked and let themselves in. It's now looking back on it, it would be unthinkable. I would be in a panic if I went out and left my door unlocked. But this was a very different time. So I discussed with you Black culture in the 20s, and in particular, the Harlem Renaissance, which took place in the neighborhood of Harlem in Manhattan in New York City. Some of the great artists of that period. If you were Black, New York City and Harlem is where you wanted to be. It was the one place in the country where you could feel really free. And Clara, I don't understand what your message is. Hold on. Like that has nothing. I don't get it. Give me a minute. I want to respond. I don't. Unless you're making a reference to the fact that that the world is more dangerous. She made a comment about a famous serial killer. Look, I'll be honest with you. In the entire time I attended public school, I never ever had a lockdown drill, ever. We had fire drills. We never had active shooter drills. It didn't exist. So, I on one level, I like the fact that I live in a more modern, technologically advanced world, but I'm not going to lie, I do miss sort of the innocence. I mean, it's unthinkable for me as a father of a 9-year-old child that I would just let my kid just wander around unsupervised and not know where he is. But in my childhood, I just came and went as I pleased, and it was different. You're going to be asked about prohibition and the 18th Amendment, which outlawed alcohol. And I said it before, and I'll repeat it. There will always be a certain segment of the population that takes great pleasure and feels that it is their responsibility to tell other people how they should live. And that's my interpretation of prohibition. Although, and I've made this comment before, there's a certain element behind prohibition that I can understand, because in those days, especially before women had the right to vote, if you were a woman who had a member of your family who had an alcohol problem and was abusive or self-destructive or destructive to the family, your options were few. So, I mean, the idea, let's be honest. I mean, if you're a woman living back then and you love your father or you love your husband or you love your son, I'm not saying that women didn't get drunk too or have alcohol problems, but I mean, if you were a woman who had a family member with an alcohol problem, the idea of, well, if you eliminate the alcohol, you eliminate the problem. Look, it's not hard to understand. Think about it. I mean, if you're a woman with an abusive husband or father, and I'll bet every one of you knows somebody who, when they're sober, they're great. And when they're drunk, they're out of control. So, I can tell you on one level that I don't agree with the idea of the 18th Amendment and the temperance movement. On the other hand, I understand it. I mean, put yourself back in that position, in that time. And I've said it before that you really cannot come close to understanding history if you do not make an effort to use your imagination. I mean, imagine what it must have been like to live back then. So, I can understand why there's a certain segment of the population that would support, prohibition. You don't have to be a history teacher to figure it out. I mean, just think about anybody who's ever had a problem because of a family member who has a problem with drugs or alcohol, and you can understand, where this is coming from. I made a comment earlier that there was a tremendous social tension in the country between the values of people who lived in the cities and the values of people who lived in the countryside. There was a lot of fear, a lot of suspicion, and fear often turned into something much darker and uglier. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about the topic of racism in American society and culture. Let me tell you, don't take my word for it. There's plenty of evidence to support what I'm saying. The issue of racism and violence directed particularly against African Americans in the 1920s was extraordinarily bad. And it is not just African Americans. I mean, there was a Jewish man named Leo Frank who had been accused of doing, something, and he was lynched. There were people who were Asian who were at risk. So, I mean, mostly the victims of lynching were African American, but not exclusively. And although the majority of victims of lynching were African American males, not exclusively, there were women who could be lynched. As I say, there were people who were Asian who were victims of lynching. There were Jews who were victims of lynching. It's just outright murder. And, forget the idea of due process of law, forget the idea of a trial by jury. The reality is, and this is something that scares me even now, the idea of the accusation is enough. If you're accused, you must be guilty of it and you must pay. Now, you have to ask yourself how you feel about that. The idea, I mean, well, let me just ask a general question and raise your hand. I mean, how many of you have ever been accused of something that you didn't do, and it didn't matter that you were innocent? You paid the price anyway, and people believed it. And it was sort of like, no one asked to prove your guilt. You had to try to prove your innocence, and it didn't matter. The damage was done. Okay? So this is not a problem that is unique to any single period of time. I mean, in the 1950s, if somebody accused you of being a communist or you didn't sign a loyalty oath, your life was ruined. So, here's the question. Are these issues really issues about history, or are they issues about human nature and what people do to each other? That for me is the real question. See, to me, the names and the dates and the events, that is simply to illustrate human behavior. History to me isn't the story about human events so much as it's about human behavior. And the events are the illustration. That's my interpretation of this. And back at that time, I mean, if you were the wrong, skin color or religion, and you were accused, the accusation itself, whether true or false, could be enough to get you killed. So, I mean, that's no joke. And as bad as the issue of racism is in our present time, I wouldn't want to live back then. I mean, would you like to be a person of color living in the South in the 1920s? I mean, are you kidding me? And even though women got the right to vote, I mean, what do you think, that women getting the right to vote, it solved all their problems? You think that all of a sudden women are, going to college in large numbers and becoming more independent and all the rest? So, I wouldn't want to live like that. back then. I mean, I would have enjoyed, back then, if I lived in New York, I'd go to a Yankee game and I'd see Babe Ruth play, and I'd go to a speakeasy and I would dance to jazz music, but beyond that, the past generally, in my view, has been so overly romanticized. I think that we really all need to take a closer look. I want to take a moment and speak to you about something that is connected to San Diego. I would argue that the world's first global celebrity was Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was a young man. He had been an airmail pilot, and aviation design, airplane design had been gradually improving. And there was a desire to find out, is it possible to fly an airplane from North America to Europe? Is it possible to fly an airplane across the Atlantic? I mean, when people travel between Europe and North America, they traveled by ship. And some of the luxury liners, if you had the money, were very comfortable and very luxurious. Ordinary people, of course, were not traveling first class, but still, that's how the travel was done. And it took quite a few days to make that kind of a trip. So the question is, can it be done in an airplane? And there were people who attempted to do it and failed and died. So this is a life-risking experiment, because if you try to fly across the Atlantic and your plane gets into trouble and you crash, you're not going to get a second chance. So Charles Lindbergh wanted to, he was a lover of aviation and he wanted to do this. And he managed to get financial backing from the business community of St. Louis. And he basically said, look, I think I can do this. If you back me up, I'll give it a try. So they gave him the money. And now he needs to find an airplane that can do it. And in San Diego, there was an airplane manufacturer named Ryan Aircraft. And they told Lindbergh that they would build him a custom airplane to his specifications specifically for this challenge. So Lindbergh came to San Diego and he worked with the Ryan Aircraft design team and the engineers, and they built the plane. And the plane is called the Spirit of St. Louis because the financing for the project came from St. Louis. But that airplane was built. It was designed in San Diego. It was built in San Diego. It was tested in San Diego. And the reason why our airport is called Lindbergh Field is because of that. And if you go to the San Diego Air and Space Museum, they have a replica, which flies, by the way. They have a replica of the plane in the Air and Space Museum, and they have another replica of that plane in one of the airport terminals. So there are people who, when they visit San Diego or you fly back to San Diego, when you exit the airport and you're going down to retrieve your luggage and heading out to where the road is, they have a replica of the plane hanging up inside the one of the terminals. It's not a big plane. I mean, this plane was just big enough to accommodate the pilot. And it had to be sturdy enough to handle this trip. One engine, which meant that if you had engine trouble, it's not like you had another engine or two to help you. I mean, if the engine failed, you're dead. They had to make sure they had enough fuel to do this. So there's no front window on this plane. It's open on the side. So in order for Lindbergh to take off and land, no joke, he has to stick his head out he has to, fly the plane and stick his head out the side and look at the runway. I mean, and when he landed in Paris, he took off from New York, he lands in Paris over like 33 hours later. He lands at night, he's exhausted. I mean, you try staying up for 33 hours straight and trying to fly an airplane across the Atlantic. Of course, he was exhausted, and he landed, and he was absolutely terrified because he landed, and the crowd knew that he was going to be there. So this mob of people stormed the plane, and it was just bedlam. He comes back to the United States after having successfully done this. This happened in 1927, and he is a worldwide celebrity. There's a massive ticker tape parade through the streets of New York City. And another personal connection I'll add to this, my grandmother was an immigrant to the United States. She came to this country, I think she was 16 years old, and she came here, I think, in 1923. So she would still have been very much a young woman when this happened, but she was in New York. Now, my grandmother, may she rest in peace, was a tiny little thing. I mean, barely 5 foot tall. She was very petite. And I don't know how many of you have grandparents who tell you the same stories over and over, but my grandmother used to do that. And one of the things that she held as a measure of personal pride was that not only was she in New York when they had the big parade for Lindbergh's return, but that she physically forced her way and pushed her way to the front of the line so that when he drove by in the car, she would be able to get a good look at him and see him. And she did. So whenever I see a video clip of Lindbergh at the famous ticker tape parade, I know that my grandmother was there in person at that moment. And, history teachers have these weird thoughts. Whenever I see the footage and they show the crowds, but you can't obviously make out the faces, but I keep wondering, I wonder if my grandmother is one of those, people in that crowd, no way of ever knowing it. But so there's that. What I will tell you about Lindbergh is he was a very strange man, a very weird man. He had the misfortune of being very shy. Now, imagine what it must have been like to be the most famous person. In 1927, he's the most famous person in the world. How would you like to be the most famous person in the world and be uncomfortable with crowds and be shy and someone who doesn't like to, get attention or be a public speaker? So he was a very strange man in many ways. There are things about him that I legitimately do not like. When World War II was coming, Lindbergh showed a particular fascination. One of the things that Adolf Hitler did when he came to power in Germany prior to the start of World War II, Hitler wants to get ready for World War II. So one of the things that he does is he rebuilds and modernizes, German air power. And Lindbergh just thought that was great. And he didn't seem to be all that concerned about the more disturbing aspects of what was going on in Germany under Hitler. And in fact, I think, Lindbergh was somewhat attracted to the idea of racial purity and genetic superiority. And I'm not going to go so far as to call him a Nazi, but he certainly was a little bit more sympathetic and less critical. Let's put it that way. And when World War II came, Franklin Roosevelt as president, he didn't want anything to do with Lindbergh. Also, right before World War II, Lindbergh became politically active and was part of an organization called the America First Committee, where, he was giving speeches, saying, we should not be criticizing Germany and we should not be involved and we should mind our own business. And, in retrospect, it came across looking like he was very sort of pro-German and sympathetic to the Nazis. I'll give him a little bit of a break and say that, maybe he didn't fully comprehend the depth of where all this was going. But it didn't make him look good, and history has been very critical of him over this issue, and rightly so. He also suffered some really weird tragedies. In the early 1930s, he and his wife had a baby boy, and the baby was kidnapped and killed. This was the media story of the day. What happened to the Lindbergh baby? And baby was found dead. And later, there was, I believe, a German immigrant had been found with some of the ransom money. And this gentleman who was found with some of the ransom money was the prime suspect, and he was found guilty and executed for the death of the Lindbergh baby. But there's a lot of question about whether or not he was really guilty or not. I mean, if somebody had kidnapped this baby and had taken ransom money, but that money had been put into circulation, then if you end up with some of that money, those marked bills, people may wrongly assume that you're guilty. And the man who was found guilty and killed for the death of the Lindbergh baby maintained his innocence right up to the end. So I don't know. Is he guilty? Did he do it? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It's like the Sacco and Vanzetti case. And you have to remember that in those days, they didn't have the forensic technology like we have today. They didn't have DNA testing, or they didn't have, the technology to investigate crime that we have now. So, maybe, some of these people accused of these horrible crimes, maybe they did it. Maybe they didn't. One of the most famous cases that I'm sure most of you never heard about was the case of these two young men, Leopold and Loeb. And this is so bizarre. These guys, basically, they were gay and were physically involved with each other. And they developed this weird, like sick idea that they were morally superior and were therefore not bound by the morality of normal civilization. And they came up with this idea that they were going to show that they could commit the perfect crime, that they were going to get away with murder for thrill. So they lured this young boy that one of them knew, and they killed him for no reason other than to see if they could get away with it. And in the end, they got caught and went to prison. It's known as the case of Leopold and Loeb. There's this newer movie out, and I can't remember the guy, where he plays there are these two high school kids, and they want to see if they think they're better than everybody else, and they want to see if they can get away with murder. And I can't remember the actor who's in it, but it was inspired by the Leopold and Loeb case. But there was a lot of weird stuff that went on in the 1920s. There was this daredevil craze where people are like, climbing up see if they could climb to the top of a skyscraper, or they're flying. They're standing on the wing of an airplane and dancing on the wing of an airplane in the sky. There was this weird sort of reckless daredevil craze that went on. It's just, I can't explain it. I can only explain it in the idea that in the 1920s, it was a weird, crazy time, and people just wanted to do weird, crazy things. People are drinking, people are partying, they're just indulging themselves in every sensation that they can. It's a very odd time. I made a comment earlier about the problem of racism in the 1920s. No joke. I mean, it was out of control. Membership in the Ku Klux Klan was huge. People got lynched on a regular basis. And there are many ugly moments of racism. We talked about the Red Summer of 1919. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Can you imagine being a Black soldier, risking your life for your country, going over to Europe and surviving the battlefield of World War I, and then you come home and get killed? You come home, you get off the train, and you get killed. I mean, that's unbelievable. But it happened. Check out this situation that some of you may know about, which is very famous. Although for a long time, people didn't talk about this stuff. It's like the 1919 flu pandemic. Nobody talked about it for years. So I'm going to do a screen share and check this out. This is some crazy stuff. Hold on. Give me a minute here. Hold on. I want to stop the share. Let me try it again. It's amazing. You think after all this time, I would be better at doing this. Watch this, everybody.
Something terrible happened here. And for decades, people didn't talk about it.
I was an adult before I ever heard about it. It was something that was hidden.
This entire historic community was obliterated.
Bodies dumped in rivers, bodies dumped in mass graves. It was an absolute massacre.
This story isn't one you'll find in most history books. And almost 100 years later, the facts of what exactly happened that day are still unraveling.
So we're driving in what's known as Black Wall Street. It's where one of the nation's worst episodes of racial violence took place.
In 1921, a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Greenwood District was a bustling community of Black-owned businesses. Tulsa locals know that period of Greenwood's history as a kind of golden age.
If you can imagine just like an old-time downtown, things like movie theaters, pharmacies, hair salons, and so forth.
They called it Black Wall Street.
It was a mecca. It was a huge success.
But Black Wall Street was also an anomaly. It thrived at a time when the KKK was incredibly active in Oklahoma, and the nation had just been through the Red Summer of 1919, when white mobs murdered Black people in dozens of incidents across the U.S.
There needed to be a sort of match or an igniter tossed on these embers. And that trigger event was an incident that involved two teenagers, Dick Rowland, 19-year-old Black boy who shined shoes downtown, Sarah Page, 17-year-old white girl who ran an elevator in a downtown building called the Drexel Building. He went to the building, boarded the elevator, something happened, Sarah Page began to scream. They both ran out of the elevator.
Now, we don't know exactly what happened in this elevator, but a day later, Rowland was arrested and taken to the courthouse. The local newspaper ran an article claiming Rowland had assaulted Page. Even though Page refused to press charges, the article was essentially a call to action for whites.
A large white mob began to gather on the lawn of the courthouse. Dick Rowland was in jail on the top floor. A number of Black men, several dozen, marched down to the courthouse to protect him, some of them armed. There was a struggle between one of the Black men in the small group and one of the white men in the larger group, and things sort of went south from that point.
Hundreds of white people descended upon Black Wall Street, armed. Black residents withdrew behind the railroad tracks that marked off the Greenwood District. Some of them were armed and fought back, but they were outnumbered by the white mob, which shot their way through. The white mob murdered, they looted, and they set fire to Black Wall Street.
This was the strategy, if you will, of how to deal with these communities, with these successful Black communities. The effects were disastrous.
For 2 days, the Greenwood District burned. Martial law was declared, and the National Guard was brought in. By the time the massacre ended, Greenwood was in ruins. More than 1,200 homes were destroyed, and 35 blocks burned. The exact number of casualties is harder to pin down. Some initially only reported that white people died. Others reported somewhere between 30 and 100 mostly Black casualties. But estimates now put that number closer to 300. As for those that survived, thousands of them lived in tent cities in the months that followed, and were left to pick up the pieces of rubble they once called home. After the massacre, the cover-up started. Records went missing from city files, including the very article that started it all. It makes photos from this time all the more important as part of the historical record, but back in 1921, these images served a very different purpose.
So photo postcards like these were pretty widely distributed after the massacre. At the time, they were a part of white supremacist culture and kept as souvenirs of racially charged crimes.
Now they're preserved to make sure this part of Tulsa's history isn't forgotten, and they paint a clear picture of how much destruction there was that day. On the postcards, it's called the Tulsa Race Riot, a name that itself sort of erases what really happened.
By calling it a riot, it's a way of trying to rewrite the history, assuming that there were both sides at fault, and that was not the case. I call it a massacre, and I call it that because that's what it was.
Greenwood eventually rebuilt, but nearly a century later, there's a part of this story that still haunts the city. No one actually knows where the victims' bodies are.
We've got to find our people. We've got to put them at rest. If not, we'll continue to be haunted by what was done so many years ago.
Kavin Ross, a local writer, is one of many in Tulsa descended from people who lost everything in the massacre.
So in this cemetery, there are only 2 official victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Right. How many victims do you think there are?
After all these years, I think 300 is putting it mild.
In 1997, the city finally put together a commission to study the massacre and help piece together what happened in 1921. They compiled records and eyewitness accounts.
The bullets were just raining down over us.
They set our house on fire and went right straight to the curtains and set the curtains on fire.
These accounts are especially important now because none of these survivors are alive anymore. And they also provided new information. Some mentioned trucks, like this one, loaded with victims of the riot. One riot witness in particular came forth testifying that he saw bodies being dumped in Oaklawn Cemetery.
Sorry about that. YouTube or whatever, nothing's free. My apologies. I can mute it though, at least.
This is it. This is the area.
Using the survivor accounts, records, and eventually radar, the city was able to pinpoint 3 locations with anomalies in the soil. Only one step was left: to excavate. But it was something the city at the time wasn't up for doing. For many Tulsans, it was a part of history best forgotten and not worth investigating. In some ways, today, that sentiment remains.
Kind of waste of money.
Why do you think that?
It's over, it's done with.
But there are clear signs of a city that's ready to come to terms with a dark chapter in its history.
Honestly, that's a lot of missing people that probably had families.
We owe it to the people whose blood has actually fertilized the grounds of this place.
There was a tremendous amount of racism.
Injustice plus time does not equal justice.
Today, a new mayor is reopening the investigation.
I think a pretty basic compact that a city makes with its citizens is, if somebody murders you, we will do everything we can to find out what happened to you and give your family closure. And whether you were murdered yesterday or you were murdered 98 years ago.
The city will be looking into the 3 areas that the commission noted. That process of finding out what lies beneath Tulsa and DNA matching any remains with descendants could take years. The investigation is just one part of a bigger historical reckoning, but the reality is it can't undo the crimes or the cover-up of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre.
This story is the greatest conspiracy of silence that I've ever seen in history.
So the fact is, I mean, history is filled with lots of stories that just fell off the pages of the history books. I don't remember when I was in high school and I was interested in history even then, learning about the 1919 flu pandemic, for example. And I know that even before the current coronavirus pandemic, that when I would talk about it in class, there would be many students who would say, well, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And I'm sure that for many of you, hearing about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, this horrible situation, probably for some of you, it's the first time you've heard about it. And history is filled with stories. I think that's one of the reasons why I like teaching it, is to me, teaching history, a large part of it is about storytelling. And I want to make sure that stories that deserve to be told are not forgotten. And I may not get them all, but I can try. And I mean, what happened in Tulsa in 1921, I mean, every American should know about this. You know, every American, not just American, anybody really, whether you're an American or not, should know some of this history. What happened with the flu pandemic in 1919, everybody should know that. Killed enough people. So, you know, I want to make sure that these stories live on. So that matters to me. I am starting to run out of time, but I do have 2 videos that I want to show you that I really need you to see. So please watch these, and then we'll call it a day. But these are very important.
Monday, July 20th. Darrow and the defense team called a surprise witness, William Jennings Bryan.
The idea of the defense lawyer calling the chief prosecutor as a witness is absurd. It's a totally inappropriate role for an advocate to play.
He knew what Darrow was going to do. Darrow was going to try to ridicule his religious beliefs, and he was not going to allow that.
Darrow began with a simple question. You have given considerable study to the Bible, haven't you, Mr. Bryan? Yes, sir, I have tried to. Do you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted? Bryan replied that some parts of the Bible should be taken literally, others symbolically. Under Darrow's rapid-fire assault, Bryan retreated into simple answers and jokes. Mr. Bryan, do you believe that the first woman was Eve? Yes, I do. Do you believe she was literally made out of Adam's rib? I do, Mr. Darrow. Did you ever discover where Cain got his wife? No, sir. I leave you agnostics to hunt for her.
Bryan had the local audience very much in the palm of his hand. And I think Bryan won the local battle. Darrow, of course, understood that the real battle was being fought out nationwide, and he was playing to a larger audience.
So the Scopes trial is basically a young teacher was accused of breaking the law by teaching his students Darwin's theory of evolution. And what I'll say in terms of religious faith and religious belief is that I never question anyone's faith or belief. People should be allowed to maintain the values and the religious beliefs that are important and meaningful for them. This teacher taught Darwin's theory of evolution, which of course does not line up with the biblical creation story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and all the rest. And in Tennessee, that was against the law to question that. So he was put on trial, and it was the media circus of its day. There were newspaper people and reporters from all over the world attending this. And in the end, Scopes was found guilty, but then later his sentence was overturned or suspended later. But I mean, this conflict between religious faith and secular belief, or this conflict between religious faith and scientific. I mean, we still argue today about global warming or climate change. Is it real? Is it exaggerated? Does the science support it? Does the science not support it? And look, we're having an argument now over coronavirus. Should we get the vaccine? Some people say they don't want to get the vaccine. What I'm trying to say is that even today, we may not argue about the identical things, but we argue about similar things. People have a debate over a variety of topics, social issues, political issues, sometimes things that conflict with their personal religious beliefs. And to me, the Scopes trial is simply an example of that. And so, it's also known as the Scopes monkey trial. So I want you to be aware of that. And the last clip that I want to show you is about Lindbergh, and then we will call it a day. And this clip is relatively brief.
After Charles Lindbergh made the first nonstop solo flight across the Atlantic, he became an instant national and international hero. What followed in the United States was the so-called Lindbergh boom in aviation, an intense interest in aviation of every way, shape, and form. It is estimated that when he got back to the United States and flew a tour with the Spirit of St. Louis, approximately 1/3 of the population, almost 50 million people, saw him. His effect was huge beyond belief. In the 1920s, just about anything dealing with flight was very closely watched by the press. Every new flight was something different, a different speed, a different distance. Flying across the Atlantic was a very, very big deal. Lindbergh was the perfect archetype of an aviation hero. He was 25 years old, tall, thin, he was handsome, perfect example of a young American hero. There were little children running around wearing a Lindbergh helmet. Teenagers and young adults were dancing to the Lindy Hop, very popular dance craze across the nation. Almost immediately, you see all these products emerging. Anything you could put his face on, somebody did. He was the biggest of all the big deals. He ignited the world's interest in air transportation.
Hold on. I got one more, and then we will call it a day. And you'll enjoy this one because it takes place in San Diego.
Okay, imagine it's 2003. There's something flying around that's getting a lot of attention, and it's a strange thing.
I mean, very strange. People must have looked up to the sky and thought they'd gone into some kind of a time warp. I mean, look.
See it? It's a little airplane, but not just any plane. It was like going back more than 80 years ago when this one flew over, a definite attention getter. In fact, the longer you watch it, you know what that plane begins to look like? But it couldn't be. That was back in 1927.
Paris hailed Charles Lindbergh as the hero of the 20s.
There's Charles Lindbergh's plane from back then. And here's this one from 2003, up there flying around in the skies near Gillespie Field. You better believe people noticed. It really did look for all the world like Charles Lindbergh and his plane had come back to fly over the city where it was born. But that couldn't be. Still, there was the Spirit of St. Louis landing here before our very eyes, and still around if you know where to look. No, not the original Spirit, that's at the Smithsonian. No, if you want to see the one that flew over San Diego on that day in 2003, go to the very down-to-earth Air and Space Museum in Balboa Park on any day, and right there is the centerpiece, an exact replica of the Spirit. And just in case you might think, oh, that's nice, but it could never fly, here's the proof that it can and did make some history of its own about San Diego.
Okay, so I hope you found today's class interesting. I think you can tell that I enjoy covering this material. I find it interesting, and I also think some of it is very important. And what was the video called? Could I put it in the module? I don't know if you're referring to the video about Lindbergh or the Tulsa massacre, but if the Tulsa massacre video is not in the module, I'll add it. That's not a problem. And if there's anything that I show you in class that you want added to the module, send me an email so I don't forget, because when you get to be my age, you tend to forget things. So that's about it, except if anyone has a question, you can stick around, and anyone else who doesn't is free to go. Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
Okay, so you were talking about the case where they like got away with murder in the 20s. What was that case called?
Oh, I was referring to lynchings. That people who engaged in lynchings often got away with murder, and they would even take photographs of themselves with the victim and send them out as postcards. So that's what I was referring to.
Oh, I thought you were referring to like a separate case where
the specific cases that I talked about the Sacco and Vanzetti case, but they were found guilty and executed, and there's some debate about whether they were actually guilty or innocent.
Okay.
So, I talked about that case. I talked about the Scopes monkey trial. I talked about the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. The Leopold and Loeb case.
That's it. Yeah. Leopold and Loeb.
Yeah, where they wanted to see if they could get away with it. Yeah, that's crazy. Look that up. You'll be just stunned at how just demented and bizarre it is.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else with a question for me?